Hello, everyone. Welcome to the course, Foundation and Substructure Construction. I'm today's instructor, Wang Xiyang. Now, if you take a look at our surroundings, you'll notice that today's class is a little different from usual. That's right. Today, I'm taking you into our life-size training facility. Let's see what the shallow foundations we've studied, especially raft foundations, actually look like in real life. Let's take a look together and find out what is this all about. Also, a quick reminder, don't forget that whenever we enter a construction site, we need to wear our safety helmets and fasten the chin strap. Basic safety awareness. Today's class is focused on helping you understand raft foundations, which are a type of shallow foundation. First, let's do a quick review together. What is a shallow foundation? Some of you might remember the key criterion is 5 meters. If the foundation's depth is less than 5 meters and conventional construction methods are used, then it's classified as a shallow foundation. Common shallow foundations include, and here on my right you can see individual footing, right? That's a cup footing within the category of individual footings. And over here is a strip footing, also a type of individual footing. Compared to those, you'll notice that raft foundations are structurally more complex. From a structural mechanics perspective, the goal of all foundations is to increase the bearing area in order to reduce the pressure on the underlying soil. That's the basic principle. For individual footings, we expand the area at a single point. For strip footings, we stretch it into a line. Now, think about it. We've covered point expansion, line expansion. It is an expansion of the surface area, exactly surface expansion. And that's what today's topic is about. The raft foundation, also called the raft slab. Its distinguishing feature is that it covers a large area, a whole surface. I hope everyone can master this part. Well, since our raft foundation is one large slab, you can see that its overall characteristics are very similar to our floor slabs. The similarity between raft foundations and floor slabs lies in the fact that we've learned about floor slabs with beams and without beams. Likewise, raft foundations are also divided into two types. One is the beam-type raft foundation, right? This one includes beams. The second is a flat slab raft foundation, which doesn't include beams. In this type, the columns are placed directly on the raft slab. In the other type, it's like a wedge added beneath and the column placed directly on that wedge. That's our beam-type raft foundation. Now, based on the position of the beams relative to the raft slab, the beam-type raft foundation can be further divided into top beam, bottom beam, and middle beam types. Alright, everyone, I believe that by now you have a basic understanding of raft foundations. Next, let's take a closer look at the internal structure of raft foundations, their construction, and the detailing involved. Let's go inside and take a look together. Alright, everyone. Now that we've entered the internal structure of a raft foundation, next, let's take a look at the raft foundation, its construction process, and the characteristics of its structural features. First of all, because the raft foundation also uses reinforced concrete, the construction principle is the same as what we've discussed for other types of reinforced concrete: formwork, reinforcement, and concrete. So, we'll discuss the construction from these three aspects. The first one is the formwork. Some students may ask, isn't the raft foundation buried underground? Is it necessary to use the formwork at this point? Do we really need formwork? The answer is yes. But unlike ordinary formwork, since raft foundations are buried underground, we don't use conventional wooden. or aluminum formwork. What should we use? We use what's called brick formwork. What is brick formwork? It means we build brick walls around the perimeter in the shape of the formwork. This brick wall is called brick formwork. Later, when we pour the concrete, the brick wall acts as the formwork and prevents the concrete from spreading out, ensuring the final shape and quality of the structure. So please remember, raft foundations definitely require formwork, and this formwork is usually brick formwork. The second reason why brick formwork is used is that after the raft foundation is completed, the formwork cannot be removed, as it's permanently buried underground. In that case, using reusable wooden formwork would be wasteful. So instead, we build the formwork using bricks. Alright, that concludes the first part about formwork. Now, let's talk about the reinforcements of the raft foundation. The first step in placing steel reinforcement is snapping chalk lines. So, typically, before starting actual construction, we first pour a blinding layer under the raft slab. The first benefit of the blinding layer is that it can prevent the entire site from being washed away by rainwater, which could otherwise create depressions that make construction difficult. The second benefit is that because a simple blinding layer is made by pouring concrete, it allows us to snap chalk lines on its surface during construction, making it possible to precisely control the placement and spacing of the reinforcing steel according to those lines. Here's a key knowledge point. While it's not strictly required, raft foundations are usually built with a blinding layer. So, what difference does a blinding layer make for construction quality? The answer is that it affects the thickness of the concrete cover layer. You can follow the camera to take a look at the bottom of the raft foundation. In this case, there is a leveling layer beneath the raft, so you can see some spacer blocks here. If a leveling layer is not used underneath, remember that the thickness of the protective layer must be controlled to more than 7 centimeters or 70 millimeters. If there is a leveling layer, then it should be 40 millimeters. I hope you all remember these figures. That is the first step. We need to place the reinforcements. After completing the placement of the reinforcements, we need to proceed with tying the reinforcements. The first important aspect of tying is controlling the spacing. And the second key point is how to tie them properly. So, how should the steel bars be tied to ensure quality? The answer is like this. Please listen carefully. For a raft foundation, the outermost 2 rows of reinforcement bars must be fully tied, meaning that every intersection point must be tied. In the middle area, you can use an alternating one-on, one-off tying method. That is, you tie at one intersection, skip the next, and then tie the one after that, right? So please note, the 2 outermost rows must be fully tied, while the middle rows can be tied in an alternating one-on, one-off pattern. However, if the lower layer consists entirely of main load-bearing reinforcements, then it must be fully tied. You can also take a look at how this raft foundation has been constructed. Does it meet the specifications? Does it comply with what I just said? That full tying is required in such cases. Also, when it comes to reinforcement tying, the third point to note is at the intersection of 2 reinforcements. When 2 reinforcements cross, you may need to use tie wire to secure them. When tying with this wire, it must be done in a figure 8 pattern. This ensures that during the service life of the raft slab, any possible movement will not cause deformation in the spacing between the slab's reinforcements. So, that's the third key tying detail for you. In addition, you should all remember that a key characteristic of raft foundations is that they are large slab-like structures with both top and bottom reinforcement layers. This brings us to the fourth important point about reinforcement tying. To ensure consistent spacing between the upper and the lower reinforcement layers, we must use either reinforcement stools or support bars. You can also follow the direction of my hand. At this location, the reinforcement use supporting bars. Supporting bars are usually installed using a simple spot welding method. Another common method is to use saddle-shaped reinforcement to control the spacing between the reinforcements. Just like the reinforcement I'm pointing to, it uses a reinforcement stool, which is also intended to control the spacing between the upper and the lower reinforcement meshes. Also, don't forget, in construction, we emphasize protection of finished work. Take a look at where I'm standing. Notice that I'm not stepping directly on the reinforcement. Instead, we use wood planks or formwork to create a path for workers to walk on. This helps distribute the load and prevents the steel mesh from being crushed or deformed by foot traffic. Now, in special cases where there's no walkway built over the mesh, what should we do? The principle is to step only on the beams. This helps ensure spacing remains intact and doesn't get distorted. Alright, now that we've finished discussing reinforcement tying, let's move on to the third major step, concrete pouring. One key feature of a raft foundation is its thickness, which can often result in what's known as mass concrete. So, what is mass concrete? It's defined as concrete with a minimum cross-sectional dimension greater than 1 meter. Raft foundations often involve mass concrete. During the curing process, mass concrete releases a lot of heat. If this heat builds up or is unevenly distributed, it can cause cracks at the bottom of the concrete slab, potentially leading to water leakage. So, a critical point in mass concrete construction is how to prevent cracking. Generally, we can use methods such as alternating pour sections, layered pouring, or segmented construction. In terms of materials, we add retarders or slag-based additives to slow down setting time. During curing, we can cover the surface with wet burlap and water regularly to help cool the slab. Some of you might even think of another method, pouring at night during hot weather, which is also effective. Mass concrete pouring is a specialized topic. But remember, reinforcement, placement, site traffic planning, and many other aspects are closely tied to the overall quality of the raft foundation. Alright, now that we've gone over the main points about reinforcement, formwork, and concrete, let's look at some construction details. As we mentioned, the raft foundation is a large mesh structure. But have you ever wondered if this mesh is too large or too long? How can we ensure that every part of the foundation gets evenly supported? If the raft slab is too large, uneven settlement may occur, leading to cracks. So, how do we handle that? Engineers came up with a smart solution called a post-cast strip. Follow my gesture. See the area between my legs? You'll notice two steel plates underneath and the reinforcement meshes on both sides. This is the post-cast strip. Its purpose is to pour the left and the right sections first, while leaving the center strip unpoured temporarily. When do we pour it? Usually, after the first two sections have settled. According to the design documents or codes, the principle is to divide the large raft slab into multiple parts and pour them in sequence, waiting for each part to stabilize before pouring the next. Finally, we connect them into a stable whole, ensuring the overall structural quality. So, as you all know, when we carry out raft foundation construction, we usually use the method of reserving a post-cast strip. Now, what should we pay attention to during the construction of the post-cast strip? Here are a few key points. 1. The main feature of a post-cast strip is that concrete is interrupted, but reinforcement must not be interrupted. In other words, during reinforcement time, we must reserve the reinforcement in place, the method of leaving space and tying it later. After initial concreting is not acceptable. Concrete can be cast later, but reinforcement cannot be cut or left out. Let me ask you a question here. If reinforcement is exposed outside for a long period, how can we prevent it from rusting? In actual engineering practice, a common method is to brush a layer of cement mortar on the surface of the exposed reinforcement to isolate it from the air. 2. There should be steel mesh on both sides of the postcast strip to prevent concrete from flowing into the reserved zone during pouring. When it's time to finally pour the postcast strip, we need to note the following. We must wait until the previously poured concrete has reached the required strength. Before pouring, the sides of the concrete surfaces must be thoroughly cleaned. The concrete grade used for the postcast strip should be one level higher than the originally designed grade. For example, if the design specifies K30 concrete, then K35 should be used for the postcast strip. Moreover, the concrete must be slightly expansive concrete to help prevent cracking. Additionally, there's another detail we must pay attention to. Steel plates must be placed under both sides of the postcast strip. These steel plates are called water-stop steel plates, and their function is to prevent water leakage. Since we first pour both sides of the raft slab and pour the middle section later, construction joints will form at the junctions, and these spots are prone to water seepage. That's why we need the water-stop steel plates to prevent groundwater infiltration. I'm not sure whether you have now understood how postcast strips should be constructed and what their specific function island. Now, let's talk about another important point in our structural construction. Usually, when pouring the raft slab, it should be poured together with the external shear wall, although not exactly at the same time, but in a coordinated way, to ensure that the construction joint is not left at the bottom of the slab. The construction joint of the shear wall should be located 300 millimeters above the slab bottom. So, if you look at this location, you'll notice the water-stop steel plate is not placed at the very bottom. Why? As some of you who've studied mechanics might know, the shear force near the support is relatively large. So, we place the water-stop plate a bit higher in a location where the forces are slightly lower. This illustrates the details of how the raft foundation connects with the shear wall, which we've shown you clearly at the site through the actual structural setup. In terms of structure, there's one more point I want to emphasize. When constructing the basement exterior walls, we need to use timber boards, square timber, add external steel pipes for reinforcement, and sometimes use tie rods to ensure the concrete doesn't deform during pouring. However, please note that the tie rods used in basement exterior walls are not ordinary tie rods. They must have water-stop discs in the middle. Such tie rods are called water-stop tie rods. After construction is complete, the water-stop tie rods must not be pulled out. They are cut directly and left inside the wall to ensure that water cannot seep through. Alright, today we've guided all of you through a comprehensive understanding of the raft foundation. This concludes today's lesson. I hope you've all gained something valuable from it. Thank you, everyone.